Alrighty, hi folks. This is Dr. Renee Holmes with the Texas Animal Health Commission. I'm an entomologist and I'm here to update y'all on the current screwworm outbreak in Texas and to discuss some of the reporting processes for suspected screwworm cases. So let's start with the current status of the New World Screwworm outbreak. So as of July 30th of 2026, we have 8 active cases and 34 inactive cases for a total of 42. And I do just want to stop to point out that our inactive cases, our number of inactive cases is increasing. And so that tells us that what we are doing for the interventions for this outbreak are working. So to keep up to date, I've said to folks before that there is no better place to get wrong information than social media. So I do want to point y'all to 2 different places that is the 2 best locations to gather up-to-date and scientifically correct information on the screwworm outbreak. So the individual animal cases, so our total active number of cases and the inactive number of cases can be monitored at USDA's screwworm.gov. And then for our map and for our infested zones and any information that y'all might need as far as movements, I would suggest that you refer to the Texas Animal Health Commission's New World Screwworm zones that are posted in these 2 websites. Okay, so if you see maggots on your animal, you are concerned that you have a case, what is the thing to do? We can't encourage you enough to report. In the case of domestic animals, you have some options as far as who you can refer to and who to reach out to. You can reach out to Texas Animal Health Commission, an accredited veterinarian, or an AgriLife extension agent. And you can reach out to any combination of these 3. Animal Health Commission is always here to help as well. And if we're not the contact that is maybe most appropriate, we will point you in the right direction. So that's for your domestic animals, either your cats and dogs or your livestock. And then for wildlife, you want to reach out to your Texas Parks and Wildlife biologist. But if you do have a wildlife case and you reach out to Animal Health Commission, we can make that contact for you. And so in order to submit samples, you're going to start by reaching out to the Texas Animal Health Commission region office or our veterinarian on call, which our website gives you the connection, the phone number for all of that information on how to reach the vet on call. And then because this was eradicated from the United States, it is considered a foreign animal disease now. So what we will do in the process of getting that sample submitted is get a foreign animal disease number as well as shipping information if it's a sample that needs to be shipped. So that's a prepaid label. So all that you have to do is pop it in the mail and we will get it taken care of from there. So let's talk about the clinical signs of screwworm. So if you see fly larvae on your animal, always reach out to us. We definitely want to err on the side of caution for any of these. If you see myiasis, if you see larvae on living tissue, go ahead and submit it. We're not going to say no to those sample submissions. But when you are checking, when you are looking at your animals, when you're keeping eyes on your animals, it is worth noting that this is not the easiest thing to notice early on in an infestation, early on in a case. So these larvae in the very early life stages, or what we refer to as instars, are very, very small. But by usually about day 3, that wound is more obvious. There is some obvious tissue damage and the larvae are pretty easily visible in most cases. And these larvae can be pretty big, juicy suckers. So they're usually pretty visible in those wounds. You'll also notice a bloody discharge that's the result of those maggots actively feeding on that living tissue. And typically you will have a foul odor associated with it, but we have had some cases that odor was not noted as being particularly offensive. So that's not necessarily something to go off of, but it is something to look out for. Now, these wounds these myiasis wounds can be pretty variable as far as what they present like. So in some cases, we'll see a small wound with deep infested pockets beneath that wound, and the exterior of the wound just doesn't look quite so offensive. It's not quite so shocking on presentation. But then we do have some cases that are a lot easier to identify where it's just like in the case of this dog in this picture that, I mean, you can't miss that. But do keep your eyes on these smaller pockets, keep your hands on your animals, and do monitor even the smaller injuries. But more than anything, nobody knows your animals better than you do. If you see your animal depressed, inappetent, off of feed, kind of self-isolating, separate from the herd, overall not feeling good, head shaking, any abnormal behaviors, put hands on them as best as you can and keep eyes on those animals, especially ones that are acting a little bit out of character. So if you see maggots on a wound, I know that it sounds a little bit wild or a little counterintuitive considering how much of a concern the screwworm is, but maggots are fragile. So when you remove them from the wound, be gentle because they're squishy little guys. So remove them with forceps. Please don't just stick your hands into wounds. Put gloves on and use forceps or tweezers, anything that you can to not just stick your hand in those wounds, and remove the maggots from the deepest part of the wound. What we can see happen, and it happens fairly often, is we can have multiple species of fly larvae in these wounds. So as the screwworm causes damage to the tissues, the animal will start to develop or can start to develop some necrosis, some kind of nasty outcomes around the perimeter of these wounds. And those are attractive to those smells, those biochemical signals are attractive to other fly species. And we can get what's referred to as secondary myiasis or colonization with a different species of fly that's more opportunistic in nature. And so if you collect from the perimeter of the wounds and you have multiple species, including screwworm, if you grab the wrong larvae, then we might get a non-representative negative. We might get a false negative. Now, also be apprised that this type of myiasis is very painful, and so be really careful when removing screwworm maggots from an injury or just any maggots from an injury, because we don't want you to get hurt when you're digging on your animal's wounds. And once you have the maggots, place them in a screw top container and submerge them in alcohol. Make sure that the maggots are submerged in alcohol. We highly recommend ethanol, and it's a little bit on the interesting suggestion side, but if you are in a pinch, Everclear works great. And then reach out to Texas Animal Health Commission or USDA to report that case and get those samples submitted. So let's talk about the response and where we are in the progress of the response. So for our eradication efforts, the sterile fly dispersal is really going to be our silver bullet to containing and re-eradicating this pest. So we have active dispersal centers in Tampico, Mexico, and the dispersal polygon extends from that dispersal center approximately 50 miles into Texas. And the COPEC facility, sterile fly production facility in Panama, is currently producing around 110 million flies per week, but it is worth noting that we're going to need between 400 and 500 million flies per week in order to contain the current outbreak. So we are putting active efforts towards increasing the number of sterile flies being produced. So those include in Matapa, Mexico, there's a sterile fruit fly facility that is being converted into a sterile screwworm facility. And that's supported by about $21 million from USDA, and it's expected to open in July of 2026 and be operational by December of 2026. I'm sorry, July of 2026 is when it opened, and then it'll be fully operational by December of 26. And that's expected to supplement with an extra 100 million flies per week. Now, USDA has put together the screwworm response playbook, and they're still actively accepting comments on that at this website. So if you have comments, especially from producers, please reach out to USDA with those comments. And there's a sterile fly dispersal facility that's established in Mission, Texas, and that opened in February of this year. And this is where the pupae are prepared for dispersal. But we are also actively working towards a production facility in Mission, Texas as well. And that broke ground in April of 2026, and it is shooting for full capacity by spring of 2028. So these are what the flies look like, the pupae that come out of these facilities, these sterile fly production facilities. And these are the really cool fluorescent stained flies or fluorescent dyed flies that you've probably heard quite a bit about. This is what they look like when they are in the pupal casing. And then this is what they look like when they are field identified. So the way that this works is when flies emerge out of the pupal casing, There is a little organ called the tilinum that's located, it's in this picture, it's located in between the eyes of the fly. And it's kind of a membranous structure. And so when the fly, it closes or comes out of the pupil casing, it uses the tilinum to push the end cap of that pupil casing off of it. And when it does that, the tilinum, that little membranous structure, gets that fluorescent dye on it, and then it retracts back into the face and it maintains that fluorescent powder dye on it. So this is the way that in the field we can tell the sterile flies apart from the wild type flies. So when we put them under a black light, this is what they look like. So let's talk about what we are doing in Texas on the response side. So it's really important to note that New World Screwworm flies have been documented to fly incredibly long distances when a female is looking for a susceptible host to oviposit or lay her eggs on. So anywhere from 6 to 12 miles is how far they are capable and have been documented to fly. Typically, they're not a very long flying species, but when a female is trying to find a susceptible host to lay eggs on, they can be pretty committed. And while the adults and the ability to move of the adults is an important part of what's been going on here, the kind of the bigger or more concerning part of this is that infested livestock and wildlife can spread the fly over much greater distances in the larval stage. So if there is a colonized animal that is transported or is moved by truck or a human facilitated movement, then the population of flies in the immature stages on that animal can move screwworm much further. So that's the reason we need these checkpoints that we currently have in place. So the screwworm response is based on some pretty basic epidemiologic principles where we prevent contact with screwworm flies with the susceptible host, so any animal, and we also stop the production cycle of those flies. So prevention, we're going to prevent, detect, and treat wounds of domestic animals and livestock. We're going to establish quarantines and treat infested livestock, put movement controls in place, do inspections, and have regulatory control areas so that we can kind of keep eyes on these animals and prevent movement of larvae on the animals. And then we monitor and manage wildlife within the affected areas. We also stop the production cycle of flies by intervening on the life cycle of the fly using sterile insect technique by releasing sterile males. And we also want to detect and treat infested animals so that the larvae never reach the adult stages. So response, quarantine and movement restrictions are a really big part of keeping screwworm when we have an infested area within that infested area and treating that area to prevent the population from growing. So our quarantine areas are referred to as infested zones, and these are for safeguarding and mitigating the risk of other parts of the state that can be facilitated by animal movement. And this is really important to maintaining interstate livestock movement because it protects the rest of the state. It keeps the rest of the state from being exposed to screwworm by animal movements. So one of the things that we really want to drive home is that animals can still move out of infested zones. You just kind of have to do a little bit more paperwork in order to do a little bit more homework in order to get that accomplished. So they can move out of an infested zone if they have an inspection, treatment with an approved protocol in most cases, identification, and a movement permit. So if you have all of those things, you will be allowed to move out of those infested zones. And we want to make it abundantly clear that we are committed to the continuity of operations, and this will not, screwworm infestation will not require destruction of uninfested animals. So if you don't have a case, the animal is not going to be destroyed. And it does not really require euthanasia of even infested animals with proper treatment. So with very rare exceptions, being in an infested zone is not going to result in a shutdown of facilities, of operations, of premises. It's just going to, again, require a little bit more homework. But on the producer side and on the owner side, it is really important that we consider that how movement restrictions could impact you. And so that if something is to occur, if we do have an outbreak or we do have a case, that you know what to do and how to proceed based on the way that your operation is working. So some attributes of the treatments and of the response plans. We do have the sterile fly production facility that we already mentioned. We have systemic pharmaceuticals, so parasiticides, that a lot of different groups are working to expand the list of effective products against New World Screwworm. And manufacturing companies and FDA are working to approve new products as well. And then we have topical and environmental insecticides that EPA and manufacturers are also working to expand that product list. So these are some resources for both pesticide and parasiticides in order to both treat environments, topicals, and to do systemic treatment for animals. Now, even though we are talking about treatments, and that's obviously a huge part of controlling screwworm, I do want to just put the asterisk on this part of it, and that appropriate, responsible, and judicious use of these products is incredibly important, because it's worth noting that many of the products that we use for New World Screwworm treatment are also used for things like cattle fever tick and internal parasites. And so we don't want to handicap ourselves by not having effective treatments by increasing resistance or facilitating resistance to any of these products. We are in a very specific position right now where we have orders of magnitude more products available to us than for this treatment or for treatment of New World Screwworm than we did when the original eradication efforts were going on. But we also have these tools used for all of these other problems that we run into. So we don't want to end up with resistance in cattle fever tick and other parasites or in New World Screwworm, because we want to keep using these products that we know work. So being judicious and talking with your veterinarian about when and what to use is a really important part of this. So I think probably the biggest and most important part of the screwworm intervention is surveillance. And this is largely on the part of the producers. This is largely on the part of the folks that own these animals. So this is absolutely critical to controlling and understanding where these infestations are occurring. Y'all are our first set of eyes and ears in the field, and it is so important that the surveillance and, importantly, the reporting side of this is something that we're in constant communication with y'all about. So this does slow the spread. Reporting slows the spread of infested domestic animals, which we've already kind of touched on that, and it protects the marketability of the entire state. If we have a handle on where we have infested zones, that lets us know what we need to do in order to protect the entire state. But it also speeds the eradication efforts by the release of sterile flies. So one of the most commonly asked questions that I personally get is, how do we get flies? How do we get flies? I really want flies at my property. How do I do it? Let us know, keep your eyes on your animals, and if you have a case, report it to us. That's how you get flies. So what happens if we have a case? So from when we first get a detection, Animal Health Commission when we get a report in a suspected area, Animal Health Commission or a USDA veterinarian will fill out a foreign animal disease investigation paper, and that will start off the process of triaging the situation. So samples will be collected for official identification by experts, and if New World Screwworm is confirmed, then the situation will be evaluated quickly. We'll determine the fly population in the area, if there is an established population, and then we'll start response plans that can include infested zone establishment, animal movement requirements. We'll assess sterile insect distribution needs and stop the spread, prioritize stopping the spread, but also prioritize the continuity of animal agriculture and business. So Animal Health Commission then coordinates with USDA on what the response is necessary based on the epidemiology of the infestation. And we notify county judges and commissioners, and during those first initial hours, we enact response plans by deploying personnel for inspections. We'll put up sterile fly traps, provide education to folks in the area so that everybody's kind of apprised of what's going on, and then we'll determine where these sterile flies need to be deployed. So for those movement restrictions, Texas Animal Health Commission may establish some checkpoints and inspection points along the perimeter of the infested zones. And part of this is a way for us to keep eyes on livestock and provide a second set of eyes for folks when they are moving their animals. But it's also been a really great way for us to be able to keep the public informed and kind of let them know what's going on and what the protocols are for moving in and out of that infested zone. And just to let folks know that they're in an infested zone, because sometimes people just don't know. So what can y'all do as owners and stakeholders? What's the appropriate thing for y'all to do as major stakeholders in this event? So more than anything, enhanced management practices are the most important part of your part of your contribution to this effort. Good management is good prevention. So we see from studies in Central and South America that well-managed operations have a lower New World Screwworm burden than places that are not maintained as meticulously. So keeping eyes on your animals and routinely inspecting for maggots and wounds is a huge part of this, but also preventing wounds by keeping your facilities as maintained and as safe as possible. Doing preventative practices, so keeping up with and maintaining animals that when they're injured, treating those wounds, drying them up as quickly as you can, getting them healed up as quickly as is possible, preventing infection, things like that. And also timing and following up with elective procedures, so things like dehorning, vaccination, ear tagging, all of those kinds of activities. If you can time those into periods when the fly burden is a little bit lower, so avoiding things like ear tagging and dehorning in the middle of summer, doing that during the winter time if at all possible. That's a really important part of preventing available area or available tissue for screwworm females to colonize and to lay eggs on. And when you do have wounds, treat them promptly. Treat the umbilicus of newborns, treat wounds, put topicals on them, dry them up as quickly as you can, and apply pesticides appropriate for New World Screwworm, while also, again, remembering to be judicious and be as light-handed as you can or as is advised by your veterinarian with those products so we prevent resistance. So keep an eye on your animals in pastures, pens, anything like that, but especially prior to and following transportation, because we all know that animals love to hurt themselves on the trailer. If they get hurt on the trailer, treat before, treat after. And then again, for monitoring procedures, monitoring for elective procedures, so things like castration, vaccination, ear marking, tail docking, implants, all of those kinds of things, keep an eye on those wounds because even very, very small injuries are prime colonization location for New World Screwworm larvae. So I kind of love this. We've been saying this since the beginning of the outbreak. When we get asked, one of the really common questions is, what can I put on my animal for New World Screwworm? And the answer that we have been communicating to folks is eyes. The best thing that you can put on your animals is eyes. Keeping an eye on them and monitoring them as intensely as possible is the best thing that you can do to prevent New World Screwworm. So we've kind of talked about why it's so important to report. I know that the big, scary, dirty quarantine word is not one that anybody likes to have thrown around, but it's helpful to us on the regulatory side, but it's also incredibly helpful to y'all on the producer side to report. So the sterile flies are deployed within 24 hours of a confirmed case. And that will suppress the local fly population so we don't have spread and we don't have more cases. It also limits zone spread, it prevents the adult fly population from expanding, and it mitigates the movement of those animals into uninfested areas so we don't inadvertently expand the quarantine zone or the infested zone. So this is, I think, probably the biggest take-home message is that this is really a community issue. It's going to take intervention, it's going to take efforts from every single person that is in the stakeholder group of the livestock industry. It's going to take all of us paying attention and being judicious about everything that we're doing and helping each other to get this under control. And for the time being, the name of the game is keeping the population as low as we possibly can until sterile fly production is at the capacity that we need for a complete eradication. So for the time being, keeping your eyes on your animals and letting us know when you have a case or if you have any suspicions is really the most important part of this. So please, if there's any take-home message to leave with today, it's keep your eyes on your animals and keep in communication with Animal Health Commission, with USDA, or with any of the partners that you have available to you for reporting purposes. So with that, oh, never mind, I do have a couple more things. These are some additional resources. I've kind of touched on some of the resources available to y'all. We have the USDA website, our website, AgriLife Extension's New World Screwworm page is a great resource. The Screwworm Coalition and the United States Animal Health Association are all great resources for this. And then this is a map of the region offices for Texas Animal Health Commission. So this kind of gives you an idea of, based on your region, based on your location, who is best to reach out to with any concerns or questions. And with that, we can move on to the question section.